Yesterday, Gamal Zayda, a journalist and columnist in Al Ahram newspaper and the Secretary General of the Foundation Noon for Arts and Culture.
I was born in Port Said during the 50s, last century, and let me tell you that the environment in Port Said during those days was great. Why? It was after 1952 revolution, and we still had during that time Italian community, Greek community, some of French families over there in Port Said, and that's why I felt the spirit of tolerance in Port Said. Port Said was open to the Mediterranean countries. That's why I always say that I belong to the Mediterranean civilization, as of course originally I belong to the ancient Egyptian civilization and the Coptic civilization, the Islamic civilization, and you have to add to that what the Italians and the Greek and the French and the other communities influence in the culture in Port Said during that time. It was a small town. It wasn't big like nowadays, and we used to go during summer from our houses wearing swimsuits to the beach directly, non-stop, and the family usually they send us the lunch. We have good time, and we didn't feel we were deprived from even the consumer goods. Some other people, in the countryside, on the other governorate in Egypt, they will tell you that during the 50s and during the 60s, we haven't seen luxurious goods like chocolate, like apple, the imported apple and so on. But in Port Said that was available. Why? Because we had the ships, big ships. They stop in the Port Said, and they started trading with the traders of Port Said. We call them al-Bambutiya. Al-Bambutiya. They have the spirit of the traders, and to tell you the truth, it was a very nice time. I still remember the atmosphere of Port Said, because when I started reading Professor Samir Amin, he's one of the most distinguished economists in Egypt, and he belonged to the Communist Party in Egypt, but he had to escape from Egypt before has been arrested. And Samir Amin, when you read his biography, you will know what was the atmosphere at the end of the 40s, the beginning of the 50s. It was a multicultural society, as we call it. There were cultural diversity, very rich.
About his hometown, Port Said, the coastal Mediterranean city, Gamal Zayda said,
In fact, after the war of 1967, the family had to stay in Port Said for another 2 years. So we have seen how the resistance starting, fighting against the Israeli occupation. We have seen all of that, but finally we had to move from Port Said to Cairo, Then I moved to Al Saidiyya Secondary School, my high school. Then I joined the Cairo University at the beginning of the 1970s, before the war of 1973. And during that time, the student movements, the student national movements were very strong at Cairo University, Ain Shams University, and other universities. They were calling President Anwar Sadat to start the war against Israel, because they want to liberate Sinai, and they want to liberate Egypt. It was, a priority for the students, was a priority for the whole nation, to put an end to the Israeli occupation. Then I attended classes for some of the most important professors in Egypt in humanities during that time. I still remember Dr. Hamid Rabia, I still remember Dr. Azzuddin Foda, I still remember Dr. Auda, I still remember Dr. Boutros Ghali. All of them, are distinguished figures in their sciences. And over and above, we studied journalism with one of the most prominent journalists in history of Egypt, Jalal ad-Din Hamamsi, a real liberal guy. He taught us how to think liberally. He was very open-minded, broad-minded. He had to lead discussions in the classrooms with the students. Was one of them. Many of them are now very well-known media men and anchors, like Ahmad Din Adib. We graduated the same year. Amr Abdel Sami, and Hamdin Sabahi as a political figure. Is the presidential candidate before. We graduated at the same year, so you can imagine how the political, economic, social environment influenced all of these people. We had tough time. We had to fight for freedom of expression. We had to fight for the human rights, because, as you know, during Nasser's era, we suffered a lot, from the lack of human rights in Egypt. When it comes to the social accomplishments, I have to admit it. During Nasser's era, we have seen many accomplishments. Like education, like social services, like healthcare everywhere in Cairo, like providing electricity to most of the villages in Cairo and most of the cities. So that's why the movement of 1952 has turned from being a coup d'etat, has made by some military officers, into a revolution, because millions of people received lands for agriculture, and many of people have received lots of services. We have a leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who knew how to communicate with the Egyptian people.
After working for years in Al-Ahram newspaper, Gamal Zayda tells us how it all began.
I graduated in 1976, and we had to go to the military. For the obligatory service, and we received this with pride, because this is a national pride. To be a military soldier, and we stayed just 1 year in the military. After I finished the military service, I joined Al Ahram newspaper.